the webinar is to raise awareness about the importance of California's High Road Training Partnership Program, and particularly for our environmental and community partners, and to really build support for the HRTP program as we're looking at some pretty significant state budget cuts this year, which we'll be talking more about that. But we're also here to share about the HRTP program and why it matters for California's clean economy. My name is Josh Sonnenfeld. I'm with BlueGreen Alliance, and I'll give my co-moderator Cesar an opportunity to introduce himself, and then we'll introduce our panelists. Cesar?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Cesar Lara. I'm Director of Workforce and Economic Development for the California Labor Federation. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Cesar. And I'm so grateful to introduce Chiara Ariano and Priyanka Mohanty. Chiara is the Associate Director of Policy for Rising Sun Center for Opportunity and the facilitator of the Bay Area Residential Decarbonization High Road Training Partnership Program, as well as Priyanka Mohanty, who's the Executive Director for the United Auto Workers Center for Manufacturing, a Green Economy. Chiara, Priyanka, anything you'd like to say as we're getting started?
Go first. Well, just thank you so much for having us, for organizing this conversation. I think it's really important to have these types of discussions as we think about HRTP and its sort of joint significance and importance, not only to building workforce opportunities and training opportunities, but also its critical piece in our decarbonization story as a state. So just really excited to connect those dots and talk a little bit more about that with the time that we have.
Thanks, Priyanka.
Likewise, thank you so much for having us. And it's such a critical budget year, and it's so important for us to be joining together and really advocating for the programs that we want to see continue. And I think a lot of times the sort of behind the scenes transformative movements, like what HRTPs move forward, can often be forgotten, even though their impacts are felt very broadly. So I'm really thankful to have a chance to explain a bit of what that work actually is doing, because it affects all of us and a lot of the initiatives that we're all working on.
Thanks, Chiara. And I know there's many folks here who probably are involved with high road training partnerships in your local communities. Please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, organization you're with, and if there is a HRTP you're involved with, we'd love to hear. In terms of the flow for today, Cesar and I are going to be doing a presentation for about 10 minutes on what is the High Road Training Partnership Program, and why does it matter for California's clean economy. I know there's a lot of folks here who live and breathe HRTP, and for some of you, you're saying HRT what? Like, what are you talking? What is this all about? You will walk away knowing what the High Road Training Partnership Program is, and so we'll do a brief presentation, and then we'll turn to our panelists, Priyanka and Chiara, to describe two different models, two different types of high road training partnerships taking place here in California, one of which is around battery manufacturing with a particular employer, in this case, Sparks, out in Sacramento. And then the other is a planning HRTP around building decarbonization. These are two different models for how these programs are utilized in the state. Cesar will then share some closing thoughts and our call to action. What can we all do? And then we'll open it up for some questions and discussion at the end. We'd love to hear from you all and help make sure your questions are answered too. So without further ado, we will launch in. And as you have questions going along, feel free to put them in the chat window, and we'll either respond to the chats there, or we'll pull that into the conversation as well. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, Cesar, can you see this all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So we're going to start with the presentation, which is why is California's investments in the High Road Training Partnership critical to building the clean economy? Okay, so first off, what is high road? I'm sure there are folks in this room that maybe have never heard this term. I oftentimes have conversations with elected officials and stakeholders that have never heard this term, which is not surprising. But basically, a high road economy is about an economy that is based on quality jobs, equity for disadvantaged communities, and environmental sustainability. A high road economy as opposed to a low road economy. Within a high road economy, firms compete by capturing the value of innovation, quality, and worker skill rather than pursuing a low road race to the bottom that's based on low wages, cutting corners. And so as we talk about the economy that we're trying to build in California, a high road economy is about centering, job quality, environmental sustainability, and equity. We know that, we are not going to have the same economy as other states where they are removing environmental regulations or paying people poverty wages or not thinking about equity within the context of that work. So we're trying to build a different model here in California for our economy and making sure that the billions of dollars of investments, whether that be state or federal investments, also support that high road economy. This is actually the stated policy goal of the state of California. This particular quote is from the California Zero Emission Vehicle Strategy from 2021. And the High Road Training Partnership Program is one of the key places that really practices high road economic development across numerous sectors. So what are high road training partnerships? HRTPs, they are diverse partnerships of employers, labor unions, environmental groups, community organizations, tribes, workforce institutions, community colleges, a whole series of different entities that all work together to collaborate, plan, and develop and implement strategies and training programs for particular sectors of the economy. It can be based on specific employers or particular economic sectors. But again, with this focus on these three legs of the stool of job quality, equity, sustainability. And sometimes you'll see, the phrase high road being utilized in certain circumstances where it doesn't involve those three. And I just want to be clear that high road always means all three: the job quality, equity, and sustainability piece. It's not high road economic development if it's missing one of those pieces. This program was established 5 years ago in 2019, originally as a pilot project, and it's since grown really into a national model. I hear from colleagues in other states all of the time, I'm like, wow, we wish we could have this program here in our state. And the state has invested hundreds of millions of dollars into building this program. I'm going to share a few examples of high road training partnerships. One of the things about the HRTP program is we are made up of hundreds of people like our panelists who are out in the communities doing the hard work, but we don't always communicate what it is that we're doing to decision makers or in the general public, because so much of this work is behind the scenes, coalition building, and problem solving. But to share a few examples of past HRTPs, again, this is non-exhaustive. There's been a high road HRTPs around establishing a green janitor program in the Los Angeles area. There was a really successful HRTP around tree trimming. So for the PG&E's electric lines, as we think about climate resilience and wildfires, making sure that the tree trimmers are actually, high quality jobs and safe. We've had multiple high road training partnerships with electric bus manufacturers, and from the steel workers to sheet metal workers to the Teamsters Union. We've had high road training partnerships around energy storage and microgrids, and planning efforts around high road economic development in oil countries such as in Kern County through the UC Merced Labor Center. And I'll note that for each of these HRTPs, there are numerous partners involved in each one of them. I've just listed a couple groups that are involved in some of these programs. Some of the high road training partnerships that are taking place right now, we have a battery manufacturing HRTP with UAW and Sparks, which Priyanka is going to speak towards. We have HRTPs around Lithium Valley, lithium mining in Imperial County. We have HRTPs around offshore wind. In fact, this is the second one. I lead a high road training partnership around planning for oil refinery transition in Contra Costa County. We have 2 different building decarbonization high road training partnerships. We've got broadband technician training programs, a number of healthcare HRTPs. We've got HRTPs around healthy school food pathways for job quality there. We have a high road training partnership around oil well capping for those workers. I mentioned the Team Gillig. This is the electric bus manufacturing with the Teamsters. And we have an HRTP around improving job quality within the cannabis sector. which is not something that the federal government would be supporting, but is something that's a key priority of the state. And so again, this is just a sample of the higher ed training partnerships, but to show you how much these partnerships are figuring out the tricky questions of how do we build these industries in a way that we're engaging communities, that we are identifying equitable pathways into these high quality careers for underserved communities, and that we're figuring out the tricky questions around environmental sustainability around challenging areas of the economy. So I want to pass this over to you, Cesar, just to describe why the HRTPs matter for California, and then I'll talk a little bit about why they matter for climate. Cesar?
Yeah, with high road training partnerships, since the planning process in 2014 to the implementation in 2017 to today, the state of California, us as taxpayers, have paid around $370 million to support high road training partnerships. And it's a unique opportunity where we could really uplift an industry and to its name, take low wage jobs and try and move them into high wage jobs. And for so many fragile industries where a workforce that is sustainable is important for it to take up in California. High road training partnerships have been that branch, and losing them is not going to be good for California. And so I'm one of the people that needs to ring the bell to say that in the current governor's proposed budget, he has zeroed out new funds for high road training partnerships. The only funds in the budget for high road training partnerships are already encumbered, which means already in contract. But there's no new funds going forward for high road training partnerships. And as California goes down the road of California Jobs First and looks at a new green economy, while we're looking at historic federal infrastructure money coming in from the federal government, high road training partnerships are a good investment into industries that need the support to make sure that the workforce is prepared for the new industries, and that we uplift more sustainability across California with these key strategic investments in high road training partnerships. So we're fearful that forward motion will stop at the critical time where we have historic federal infrastructure money coming in, and we're trying to figure out how can we make sure that California's workforce is ready for that. High road training partnerships are a key tool to get there. And our partners around the table are going to go in depth around what they do with their high road training partnerships, and the work that Josh does in Contra Costa County is a glaring example of why this program is working. And to have a successful infrastructure investment in California, to have a successful California Jobs First initiative, you need high road training partnerships. And so our fear is that it's not going in that direction with the proposed budget. And so in a couple of minutes, I'll put down in the chat an opportunity for everybody here to sign on there, where you could put your organizational logo on it to be part of the chorus to say high road training partnerships in California need to be saved, and how important they are to our community and our collective change that we're trying to have here in California. At the same time that we have these opportunities, they're closing the door on new high road training partnership opportunities. So really wanted to highlight that. And this webinar is a good example with our partners that are going to be speaking next around what high road training partnerships have done. And many of you here on the webinar are part of that team across California in key industries that have taken the mantle with high road training partnership investments and have really shown how important they are. And we have done the job of highlighting stories, and now we have to make sure that we do that in this critical budget time. And really look forward to everybody's support around high road training partnerships, and really want to hand it over to Josh and the team to really show us a couple of examples of how important high road training partnerships are for California.
Thanks, Cesar. So just to emphasize a few points before we hand it off to our panelists and then talk about what we can do. So, HRTPs, they are the infrastructure for collaboration with stakeholders that don't always work together on both existing and new economic sectors around those three legs of the stool that we talked about around high quality jobs, equity, and environmental sustainability. This work is really hard work to do. There's a whole community of practice that actually UC Berkeley Labor Center leads through a contract with the state where they're training facilitators and helping folks to do this hard collaborative work. They also help us to leverage additional private, local, state, federal funding for key sectors. Why the HRTPs matter for climate? We have all these critical new industries we are seeking to build here in the state of California: offshore wind, clean manufacturing, lithium. The list goes on. Building decarbonization, and it's not a default that these new industries will engage communities. It's not a default that these new industries will result in high quality jobs. And it's not a default that these new industries will be thoughtful about environmental impacts and environmental justice. And so HRTPs are tools in which we can bring those key stakeholders together to collaboratively work to figure out how can we make these industries as high road, as high quality as possible for all of those key stakeholders. And that, again, that is years of work that requires this investment. And it also builds support for this new economy. So we've all seen what happens when you build, new industries that don't have high quality jobs or don't have community engagement or don't have, environmental sustainability. It erodes public support for those new industries. And so, we are trying to demonstrate here in California at a global scale that we can both take action on climate and center and build our economy at the same time. And HRTPs are one of our very best tools for doing that. So we're going to talk about, and then the other point here is that there are also incredible tools for leveraging, that additional funding, particularly IRA, BIL. We've got those built-in partnerships. We're going to talk more about the budget threat a little bit later, but before we get there, I want to actually give an opportunity for you all to hear from our panelists, Priyanka Mohanty and Chiara Ariano. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And first, I'm going to turn it over to Priyanka. And I want to say before we turn it over that these are two different models for higher ed training partnerships. One is a higher ed training partnership with a particular employer, in this case, Sparks, battery manufacturer. And then Chiara will be talking about a planning HRTP, which is a little bit of a different model, but both of which have been really effective tools that have been used within this program. So Priyanka, I'll pass it off to you first to describe your HRTP and the value of this program. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. And thank you, Cesar, for that presentation, for both of you for that presentation. I think it's connecting a lot of different pieces here that I'm really hoping we can dive into. And I think our program represents in a lot of ways. So to folks who are on the webinar, thanks for joining. My name is Priyanka Mohanty. I'm the Executive Director of the United Auto Workers Center for Manufacturing a Green Economy. This was an organization that was started and really born out directly out of the HRTP funding that we received. It's focused on building what we're calling high road workforce development pathways for all of these new green industries that are getting set up in the state of California, particularly for manufacturing. So as Josh mentioned, the United Auto Workers signed what is called a labor peace agreement or a labor neutrality agreement with a battery manufacturer called Sparks that is located in Sacramento. And so what we're doing with our HRTP funding is actually building a high road training program for those prospective workers who will be joining the Sparks factory once they start production by the end of this year, early next year. And what we see is that with this funding, we're able to actually build sort of a one-of-a-kind model when we think about the green economy and in particular green manufacturing. So as many of you know, we offshored a lot of our manufacturing 30 years ago, and now we have this this critical juncture where we see in the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS Act, providing massive federal subsidies to what we think of as the employers of the future. Battery manufacturers, EV manufacturers, solar and wind manufacturers, electrolyzers, heat pumps, you name it. We're building all of the infrastructure that we need to decarbonize, and we're doing it here in the United States. At the same time, we don't have the workforce and a ready workforce that can meet those production demands that are being set both by the federal funding requirements and also by the growth of these new industries. And so this creates this sort of really critical juncture where we can leverage the high road model as the best model, not only to meet those workforce gaps, but actually guarantee that the green jobs of the future are synonymous with good jobs, with good paying jobs, with good benefits, with workplace safety, with quality training that allows workers to upskill and build careers out of these new industries. And so that's exactly what we're doing with Sparks, right? We're going to be thinking about recruitment, how we make sure that folks of all kinds from all different backgrounds can get access to good union jobs in green manufacturing. We're going to be building a pre-employment program where people can learn about battery technologies, health and safety, get the skills that they need to succeed on the job, and actually building an apprenticeship program focused on battery manufacturing that allows folks to earn while they learn and actually upskill and reskill throughout the process of being on the job. And so this model, and I should also say, in addition to that, providing things like wraparound services, stipends, subsidies for transit, childcare, ESL support, coaching, and mentoring. None of that would be possible without the HRTP funding that we received. And I should clarify that we received a capacity building grant, but the way that the budget is being set out right now, we will have no eligibility to apply for further grant money to scale this program, whether it be in other localities or geographies, or even expanding our existing Sparks program. So this model, which can be extremely useful to bring community benefits, to bring worker power, to actually decarbonize California, will not necessarily be consistently possible without HRTP funding.
Thanks so much, Priyanka. And we'll have an opportunity for questions and discussions at the end too. And UAW's program at Sparks is just really exciting. I know it's nationally received national attention, and so 1,000 workers, right, being hired to do battery manufacturing in Sacramento at a former military facility or jet facility.
Yeah,
right.
right.
So it's really exciting and such a great example of how the HRTP program can be leveraged to build help build the new economy. Chiara, I'd love to turn over to you. And what does your HRTP look like around residential building decarbonization here in the Bay Area?
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for having me and for being interested in learning a bit about our HRTP. As Josh outlined, we are operating under a slightly different HRTP organizing model. So our focus is a regionally focused partnership looking at the existing residential decarbonization industry. So essentially, to meet our climate goals, buildings currently produce about a third of our emissions in the state of California. And within that, one of the hardest types of building stock to decarbonize, to get fully off of fossil fuels, is residential buildings. And there's very unique workforce considerations with the residential building stock and challenges that we are trying to find solutions to. So our partnership is, as Josh said, more of a planning phase HRTP. We have a regional coalition of partners ranging from public entities, CCAs, cities, our local regional energy network, in addition to labor contractors, worker representatives, and supporting workforce organizations and technical experts. So while we're trying to think about decarbonizing our building stock and our residential buildings, there's a lot of money coming down to do that work. And we have an opportunity to leverage that funding and think intentionally about how we're building that transition. Currently, the residential construction industry, which is the industry that will carry out the large majority of this building decarbonization work for residential buildings, has the characteristics of what we consider a low road industry. So there's a wide variety and a lot of low wage labor, lack of benefits, poor safety standards. It's highly unregulated, and we see much lower job quality standards compared to commercial, industrial, new construction sectors. So we're taking kind of the hardest nut to crack and trying to figure out, as we are decarbonizing folks' homes, which is a huge equity project, how do we make sure that we're not doing that on the backs of workers and not perpetuating a labor industry that is sacrificing our workers? So using the opportunities of the influx of public funding to get this work done, to brainstorm and attach labor standards to residential building decarbonization programs, as a way of elevating the standards and making it an arena where high road contractors won't be just knocked out of the running in the bidding process, for upholding quality jobs and offering quality jobs. So there's a lot of learning that we had to do as a partnership from the get-go. This is a very new and rapidly developing industry. So we had to kind of get on the same page, do a lot of background research and educating ourselves before we got into more of the organizing and advocacy. But we're now using that information that we've been gathering and researching to do more of that external facing advocacy efforts. We submitted letters. For example, the CEC is building out their equitable building decarb program, another program that is on the potential budget chopping block here. And but we ended up getting some very robust labor standards in there, more than we've seen in pretty much any public residential decarb program before. And that was a huge win because we're starting to see this uptake in high road standards, and that will transform this market greatly. So that's a bit about where we're focusing our efforts.
Thanks so much, Kiara. So I want to go back a little bit, to be more specific around what are we hearing in terms of the budget threat to the HRTP program? What can we do about it? And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. And so I'm going to share my screen again here, and I'm going to turn to you. Oops, let me get that right there. I'm going to turn to you, Cesar, just to walk us through those particular details on the slides. So let me share again. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it, Cesar.
Yeah, just, thank you, Josh, and, thank you for all the presenters today. And just to be clear, what we're asking the state government to do is we are requesting that out of the $400 million that the governor has set aside for California Jobs First, that 25 million of those funding get put into new high road training partnerships. I think it is our belief that to have a successful California Jobs First initiative in California, you need high road training partnerships, and having no new money going forward is really stopping forward motion that we've had since the planning process in 2014, the first high road training partnerships happening in 2017, and today we've spent $370 million of our taxpayer money to support those programs. Other states are asking us how we're doing it and how they could model what we're doing in California into their states. And they're part of the country at the same time that we're talking about no new funds going forward. We also want to strengthen the program that currently is there. So we're proposing that eligible projects include a labor management partnership, collective bargaining agreements, or community benefit agreements, or project labor agreements in the funding going forward. And we're working with leaders in the Assembly and State Senate, but we need the voices in the community, the voices that have seen firsthand the benefit of high road training partnerships going forward. So we're requesting $25 million of funding from the state California budget to do and support new high road training partnerships with that language in there to safeguard, to ensure we continue the forward motion that California has already done. In the chat, I've added a link to a sign-on letter that also includes a checkoff if you'll be able to attend on the 7th, including the logistics and agenda for the 7th. And we're looking forward to hosting partners across the state to tell Assembly and State Senate and administration leaders to say it is important that we have this funding going forward. We've seen great success across California, and we're going to lose forward momentum. You know, it's significant that our partners spoke about their successes, but a lot of the successes are in mid-process. You know, the Sparks initiative through the United Auto Workers is getting off the ground at the same time that California is talking about ending our training partnerships is not good motion going forward, or our historic infrastructure money keep coming in from the federal government, and high road training partnerships could play a key role in that. So thank you. And I know that somebody asked if we could share the draft letter on the signing Google form. There's a click there that you can see the actual letter.
Thank you, Cesar. And so I think we're going to open it up. We're doing great with time for folks' questions. So you can type your question in the chat and we'll read it off, or you can raise your hand and then we can allow you to speak and share your question that way. So feel free to do either one of them, and we'll be monitoring. Thank you, colleague Justin, for your help in managing the webinar functions. So any questions from folks? So the first question is, what are the best practices to establish a new or significantly expand an existing HRTP? Do you want to take that one, Cesar?
So expanding, I think the biggest thing is having funding available. You know, currently right now, there is power to having a state agency administer these funds. For you know, some of us that are in relationship with foundations across the state that support programs like this, it's great. Definitely love their support, but having a united table across California with high road training partners across the state networking with each other, there is power. There is power having a state agency administering the program going forward. And there's power with, you know, it being through the state government, where a lot of the infrastructure money coming in from the federal government and other opportunities that the state will be funding to have a state agency adjacent is very different than a private process going forward. So I think there is benefit to keeping it in state governments, and there's power to that. And so the best way to establish a new or significantly expanding high road trainer partnerships, the first step is to have the funding to have it. And the second step is understanding that a good high road training partnership is a partnership between organizations across the state with organized labor and with employers. And having those united voices at the table, Sparks is a really good example. I had the opportunity to tour the facility in Sacramento and see the vision of what the facility is going to look like after it's operational, and the partnership they have with the Sacramento utility is important. And to have high road training partnership money there is going to be important because they can network with other partners across the state that have done similar work, and in some cases in more different environments. You know, having high road training partnerships across California, not just in the oil or offshore wind or lithium is one thing, but also having partners in agriculture, having partners in warehousing, having partners in key industries across California. There was power there. And so expanding is to have, you know, the funds to begin with and the vision, and it being administered by the State Workforce Board is a good thing. having it be a state agency is a good thing, and we're fearful of losing that forward momentum that we've already invested millions of dollars into in California.
Just to add something real quick, and then I think we have a couple hands. So typically HRTPs, they're formed, for grant opportunities. And so typically the High Road Training Partnership Program will have multiple grant opportunities where you can apply for, in some cases, multi-million-dollar grants. Those are frozen right now. If you wanted to create an HRTP, you couldn't, because there is no grant opportunity to apply for. And in this next state budget, there is no future HRTP grant opportunity. So when CESAR describes our ask to put $25 million back in the budget, that's so that we could expand an HRTP or we could create new ones. Right now, we can't do that with state funding because of the current setup by the state budget. And Glenn, I'm happy to follow up with you on the specifics too. I think you probably have a specific idea in mind. Justin, did you have a hand? Was there someone else in addition to Fatima?
No, that was the only hand right here.
Okay, Fatima, go for it.
Yeah, I think I might have asked a similar question in the BlueGreen Alliance meeting, but there's new panelists here, so maybe we can get some information. But I'm actually wondering about the federal CHIPS funding. I know there's a state program, I understand that, but I do know some part of the federal CHIPS funding is like semiconductors and building those apprenticeships and programs. And I'm wondering, are there any guardrails in there that these are going to be good jobs? Or is there a way the state, if they apply for this sort of funding, can add guardrails to the agency and stuff like that? Because I think that could be an important thing to leverage as well.
And I think maybe I'm going to broaden this question a little bit and pass it over to you, Priyanka, because we have IRA and Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, federal CHIPS for semiconductors, and there are some labor standards and community benefit plan standards attached to those. But with Sparks, you've also built out an HRTP with a particular employer, and so how have you utilized that? So sort of adding to Fatima's question, what are the how do those federal standards help or not help? And then how does the HRTP program sort of layer onto that to ensure that in the context of, say, a battery manufacturer or any clean manufacturer, that you're actually resulting in the high quality jobs, the community benefits, the equitable pathways into those high quality careers? Any thoughts, Priyanka?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So I think I'll start, Fatima, with your question around CHIPS funding in particular, and asking about sort of workforce and labor standards. Unions across the country are actively engaging with the federal government right now to make sure that the CHIPS money that's going out the door to these semiconductor plants have some sort of workforce and labor standards. And in our mind, we connect that directly back to something like HRTP because we can show a proof of concept of when you have those sort of workforce training programs or high road principles imbued into a certain type of program, you can see the results of, a more nimble, trained, adaptable workforce. And I think it's absolutely something that we need to be leveraging. And I think, to Josh's question, the HRTP funding really puts into practice what these federal standards are trying to imbue. So as you said, the IRA, the bipartisan infrastructure law, all of them have these requirements that say, work with labor, work with communities, make sure that you're thinking about high road principles. And companies can apply, right? They say, yeah, we have this agreement. Yes, we're doing that. And the funding is given that way. There is no guarantee that those standards are going to be upheld, right? That's just part of their application. It's assuming their good word. It's assuming that, what they're saying they're actually doing. What I think is really interesting about HRTP in contrast is that it's specifically focused on building out those high road principles, right? It's not just saying, as part of your application, say that you're working with these different organizations or, apply with that in mind. It's actually giving people money to put that into practice. And I'll just say a couple of things that I think are important as framings here. To me, the cutting of HRTP is tantamount to the cutting of something like Cal Competes, right? When we think about Cal Competes, we say, We really want our California technology to build industry in California that helps us decarbonize. I don't particularly understand how we can, on one side, say that and give out money and for CalCompetes grants to let industries stay here, build up here, super important, without also investing in the jobs, in the community benefits, and the workforce standards that come with the high road in order to fill those jobs, right? If these industries are going to be setting up here, they will not be able to operate at the scale and pace that they need and that California needs to meet its decarbonization goals without making sure that these jobs are good jobs. Because people don't want bad jobs. These jobs are not easy jobs. They are quite skilled jobs. They can be quite dangerous. And so it's really important that there is funding to support, at the same time as there's funding to support the buildup of industry, making sure that that public money has public benefit. So I love this question because it is really important that we put our money where our mouth is. And, you know, California talks a lot about equitable outcomes, a just transition, and making sure that decarbonization works for everyone. So in my mind, that is HRTP.
Thanks, Priyanka. I'm ready to grab my picket sign and march to Sacramento. We got another great question here, and I'm going to read it, and then just Kiara, I'm going to come to you after this for this as well, because I see where this is going. So the question from Bo McClung is, in offshore wind, there's currently not enough capacity within the U.S. yards to manufacture the vessels needed for offshore wind development without reopening the Jones Act. How can we, A, get that capacity up, and B, how can those of us in the environmental policy help bake into port bids policy recommendations that essentially act as a firewall to prevent contractors from having Jones Act exemptions that allow them to use bottom wage laborers? Thank you. So I'm not an expert on offshore wind, although BGA has somebody working on that. It's a huge priority for California. But what I want to highlight here, and I'm going to turn to Kiara in a second, is that the questions that you are asking around offshore wind, I am sure is something that is at the core of what the offshore wind HRTP is looking at. And this is why we have HRTPs for planning, is that a lot of the times how to improve job quality, environmental sustainability, and equity within industries requires policy change. It's not just enough to create a program to try to recruit people and to go work someplace. You sometimes have to create new policies, whether that's to create a safety net for workers or remove some legislative barrier, right? And that is why we have these planning HRTPs. So Kiara, could you speak towards that in the context of building, residential building decarbonization, and how you all are sort of thinking about the growth of this whole industry and the types of policy changes that you've been brainstorming?
Sure. And I likewise am not an expert on the offshore wind side or the Jones Act. So this might not fully fit with the question or answer the question, but in our HRTP, we've definitely been thinking about how, public investment without supporting policy action and labor standard policy action is going to fall short. And we are not going to see the quality job and equitable access to those quality job outcomes that we're looking for. So intentional public policy intervention is really critical at this time in the development of these markets, which one way that building decarbonization can relate to offshore wind is they're very new. They're building on existing workforces, but they're new scopes and new industries. So what we're working through in our partnership is crafting a very specific and very granular set of labor standards that fit the existing residential decarbonization market, because we can have overarching ideas about job quality and high road job quality, but they're different depending on the industry, right? And the conditions of that industry. And construction works in very unique ways, as does manufacturing, as does forestry. So we crafted these very specific high road labor standards for our industry. And now we're in the advocacy and organizing stage of getting those standards, like this question highlights, into bid policies, into contracts, into RFPs, so that when folks are bidding on projects, they have to meet this sort of responsible bidder criteria, which then, of course, to Priyanka's point, you need to uphold that, you need to have mechanisms, not just of them saying that they're going to do it, but then supporting them in doing it. And I will say that this is one area where cross-pollination with other HRTPs has been really helpful, because some of those early ideas came from working, getting to just be in the room with folks at Jobs to Move America, and hearing about their work with the US employment plan, and gleaning their insight from that process about responsible bidders. So that's why a network of HRTPs is so helpful. Getting to learn from each other is so helpful, but that is definitely a pretty key policy intervention strategy, is getting that language into contracts.
And if I could add a little bit onto that. So in offshore wind, there's three areas where employment could occur. There's the manufacturing of the components, and it's not little components, they're big components. There's the assembly of all the components that will create the offshore wind infrastructure, and you'll be floating them out in the middle of the ocean, off of Morro Bay and off of Humboldt, just for California, and there's other points across. The economic impact to California will be about 60% in the manufacturing part of it. And a lot of that manufacturing doesn't currently exist in California. So as we invest in that new industry of offshore wind, we need to take into consideration that we need to attract manufacturing to California. And one way to do it is not just throw money at it and say, come to California, here's some money, but you need a workforce that is trained and ready to do the work. And high road training partnerships are a good example of what could be done to prepare that workforce for the manufacturing component of it. There's going to be the assembly of it. They're looking at the port of Long Beach as the place where they're going to do it. And then float them out in the middle of the ocean. And then in the long term, there's going to be operation and maintenance work that will occur. And you have to realize that all these offshore wind turbines, when you see them onshore, just imagine them, they're going to be 30% bigger than what you see onshore when they're inland. And so these are huge, 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 big opportunities. And when the United States looked at how we could get a greener energy infrastructure, they took offshore wind as part of that infrastructure that needed to happen. So for us to have a greener California, a greener United States, offshore wind was part of that math, and making sure that we don't just do it for the sake of doing it, but use it as an opportunity to really help our economy is going to be important. With a key industry like offshore wind, where Europe has figured it out. They have invested in what would be high road jobs, where there's labor standards, where there's protection, where they took into consideration the end result, but also the economic uplift that it will do. And we can't do that in California without high road training partnerships, where you have those from day one, and we're not at day one. We're already having those conversations in California on how to do it correctly in the two areas where the federal government has given leases out. And so high road training partnerships needs to be part of that, because we need to ensure that in that chain of manufacturing, assembly, and operation and maintenance, those are good jobs. And for that, you need a skilled workforce that is able to sustain the industry going forward. And for that, we need to continue our forward investment in high road training partnerships as one example of a key large example that we could do. But it's also important in non high key large investments, but we also need it in some industries that have been around for generations that need that strategic investment to raise them from low wage jobs to high wage jobs.
Thanks, Cesar. Priyanka, did I see you raise did you want to say something?
No, I think Cesar hit the nail on the head. I was just going to say that, even outside of the Jones Act, there are a lot of, the HRTP is sort of a foundation for us to build the really important incentives to make sure that high road labor is used across the supply chain for something like offshore wind, but also when we think about all of these different sectors that we need to decarbonize. So, yeah.
Thanks, Priyanka. I hear we have another hand raised. Justin, do you want to promote them? Hey, Norm Rogers.
Hi there. I did not realize I raised my hand, but I will take advantage of it. So I would just like to offer a cautionary tale. You had Proterra up as one of the examples of an HRTP, and that turned in, oh, I was going to say a bit of a disaster. Oops, hold on. Let's do this. Oop, all right, sorry about that. So a bit of a disaster in that Proterra came out, approached us. They needed union partnership to help the business grow and take advantage of certain contracts. We got a new contract in place. We were up and rolling for a couple of years. There were community benefits agreements. There was supposed to be a training program through, I want to say it was Citrus College, I think. Long story short, they got a couple of $1 million from the California Energy Commission. They used that money, but they used that money to build a facility in South Carolina. And when that facility was completed, they had a meeting to lay out what the future looked like for Proterra, and that was to announce that they were closing their facility here in Southern California. In addition to that, while we were trying to negotiate a severance package for everyone, we asked, well, will you give the folks that worked here preferential, treatment, or, look upon their prior employment with Proterra favorably should they go out to South Carolina? They said no. Will you do any kind of transfer of costs, moving costs if they go out there? They said no. So what I want to say is that there are new areas coming to the fore employment-wise, but the mentalities of the employers are the same. And the fights are going to be the same, and the organizing that needs to take place is going to be the same. And there was no clawback language in the money that was given to them. So once they left and spent it, it was gone, and no way to get it back. So we need to be diligent about that moving forward as well, that if they don't perform, they don't get the money.
Thanks for sharing that cautionary tale, Norm. And I'll make a quick comment, and then I'm going to turn to you, Priyanka and Cesar, and then we can each share some closing thoughts. So, yeah, Proterra is a cautionary tale, and unfortunately, this happens all too common, right? Where California is the source of innovation for companies getting started and then moving elsewhere, and so that's why those standards with the investments are so critical, right? But we also hope that not every company will be like Proterra, and that we'll have more Sparks of the world that choose to stay here, right? But we need those standards connected to the funding in addition to the HRTP program, so that companies aren't just taking advantage of California's funding and workforce and innovation economy to get started and move elsewhere. But Priyanka, any sort of thoughts or comments on that? And then any final comments you want to share, and then I'll turn to you, Kiara and Cesar.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really important point, and for us to not lose sight of the fact that even with HRTP, there will still always be an organizing fight to make sure that folks who are in these positions are represented and protected and taken care of when in an industry that is going to change, in many industries that are going to change a lot over the next 10, 15, and 20 years. What we're seeing now in the green industries that are being developed are going to look really different in 10 years from now, 5 years from now. And so we need to be prepared. And I think I would just say that this, to me, is a real reason to keep HRTP and to build out programs that empower our climate workforce, right? Teaching them not only about the training that's required to meet these jobs of the now, but also to meet the jobs of the future, right? So that means teaching folks about what these technologies look like, how they're going to change, and sort of what skills can we give workers so that they are prepared for those dynamic shifts that we're going to see in the clean economy. And so in that way, HRTPs can be a great empowerment tool for workers as they move through these different industries. But I think that will never replace the organizing and the negotiation that will have to be done with companies in order to make sure that folks get opportunities out of these new industries. And I guess in just closing, the last thing I would say is that HRTPs are a really exciting way in that sense to bring many stakeholders into the process, right? You have the Sparks of the world coming in and entering this type of process with us. That can signal to other companies that it's possible to do a high road and also meet your production needs and ramp up your industry or ramp up your facility, right? We use that to build and bring more employers to the state. We use that to build and work with other employers to say, hey, we want to make sure that these standards are met. And in return, you will have a skilled workforce, right? So I think it brings those stakeholders to the table. It also brings different community and labor stakeholders to the table, right? HRTP is a great way for us to say, unions, think about how to meet climate jobs, right? Communities, you want to negotiate a community benefits agreement. Here's a way for you to build a training program that allows you to do that. So it allows us to be creative in the types of stakeholder coalitions that we build, and ultimately, it speeds up our decarbonization process when we think about getting that buy-in, right, from all of these different types of people around what the opportunities are. It means that you're going to decarbonize faster and you're going to have less pushback and less roadblocks in the future because you are creating that process of coalition building and buy-in. So I just think that that's really important to say. It's obviously important on its face, but it has so many repercussions and impacts across these different dynamics. And so just appreciate you giving us the time to talk about some of those. And hopefully we can keep doing that as this budget process goes on.
Thank you, Priyanka. Kiara, any closing thoughts?
I feel like I can't beat that, but I think that as we've heard today, these programs are really exciting and critical and connect the whole network of climate work that we're doing with these equity goals that we're all pursuing and holding very center. So we have to defend this funding and try to keep these partnerships going and make room for new ones.
Thanks, Kiara. Cesar, closing thoughts?
Yeah, just thank you for everybody attending today's webinar. I encourage everybody to sign onto the letter, and if you're able to join us on May the 7th, come join us as we tell our story and try and change the future of high road training partnerships and to kind of the examples of an area that it might not have worked the best. That's why we want language in there that really protects and is really more focused on collective bargaining agreements, community benefit agreements, and project labor agreements is important. And but at the end, we gotta save this program as we talk and invest in key industries. We need the workforce ready to do that, and high road training partnerships are a good example of how we could get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. So thank you, Cesar and Kiara and Priyanka, our wonderful panelists. And thank you to all of you for attending, especially those of you that run HRTPs out in our communities. There are many wonderful examples of how valuable this program is. We encourage you to tell your story. We really appreciate the support from our community, Enviro, other labor partners. Please come on May 7th to the lobby day. Please sign the sign-on letter. Justin put his email in. If you have any other questions, send us an email. We'd love to follow up with you. But thank you all for your time and for your support. Have a great day.